Okay, we're back again. Sorry, I'm just going to move my chair so you hear some noises because I was trying to work out. I was muted there for a second. So we are now live hosting and all is ready to go. Mason, none of the lessons from this week is on YouTube yet. Yes, as I said at the beginning, they are working on it to load it. And they said after this long weekend, this week's lessons will be loaded onto YouTube. So just hang in there. Okay, so let's continue with two-dimensional arrays, and we're going to learn how to display in a rich edit, and then we're also going to look at calculations using our two-dimensional arrays. So I'm going to share another screen to you guys. Let me just give me a second so you guys can see my other screen. And here we go. So this is what we did yesterday. We stored values in the two-dimensional array and then we displayed it in a string grid. For those who are joining the first time, this is what a string grid looks like, and this is called row 0 and this is column 0. So this part here is where we're displaying our two-dimensional array. And when we were using a string grid in the square brackets, we're going to start with a column number first and then the row. So for example, let's take Anna. She's displayed in the column 0, but in row 1. And then when we are just using our two-dimensional array, we're starting with a row first. So remember, array, row first, and string grid.cells with C, the column goes first. Okay, so let's have a look at some calculations here. Before we have calculations, remember we need to set up the size of the string grid because the string grid is often not big enough for you to see your two-dimensional array. So what I'm doing here is I am providing 2 more columns to display a total of all these values in here, and then the average of these values in the last column. So yesterday I said to you, if you have 4 columns in your 2D array, you need 1 more column to display this labeling column. So I'll need to just display this part here. I'll need 4 plus 1, so I'll need 5 columns. So I'll set my column counter to 5. But now I need 2 extras for my calculations to display as well. And this is why I need 7. So I need 4 for this, 5 for my labeling, 6 and 7 to display those 2 columns. And then to display the labels total and average, I can just put in my string grid.cells property square brackets. This is column 5 because the columns go first. So this is column 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I am in row 0. So you'll see both of these have a 0. So this is the same now for my average. This is just in column 6, but still in row 0. So that's how I get headings at the top. Now, we could also be asked to calculate something in a column, and then we'll have to add a label at the bottom to display the label there. Now, yesterday we read from a text file into a two-dimensional array, and we used iCountR to keep track of the number of rows that are filled in my two-dimensional array. So let's say I had, in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 learners in my array, and iCountR will be 6. I need an extra column, so plus 1 for the row at the top, row 0, and then plus another 1 for my label at the top, at the bottom. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm setting my row count so that it's big enough for me to display. Remember, in an exam, when a string grid has been given to you, you can't go into your properties in the object inspector and change the row counter. You have to write code for that because anything that has been given on your form, you may not change. Also, your declarations of your arrays or values that have been given, you can't change those. So that's why we need to know this code. Now, to display total here, I'm in column 0. And I'm displaying in iCountR plus 1. So iCountR is the value there, plus 1 is this row here. So that's how I get the total label to show. Okay, so when we're doing calculations, we have 3 scenarios. I'm going to start with the first scenario of we have a question that's asking us to calculate the average mark overall. In other words, what is the average of all the marks stored in my array? So this is an overall question. So I'm going to initialize my total. Remember the rule that says if a variable is on both sides of the assignment statement, we need to initialize it. Next rule, if there is a loop, we'll initialize it above that loop. But here with two-dimensional arrays, because we have nested loops, we have to learn when to initialize the total here and when to initialize it on the inside. When it is an overall question, we'll do it above our first loop. Now, when you're doing an overall question, it does not matter with which loop you start. You can start with a row loop or with a column loop. It does not matter. But we'll look at some examples later when it is a row or question, a row or a column question. And then we'll have to make a decision as to which is the correct loop to start with. So, but for the overall one, we can start with any one. By default, I just always start with my row loop. So I have my row loop here, looping from 1 to I count R, which is the number of learners in my two-dimensional array. Those who didn't join yesterday, we had a two-dimensional array, and every row contains 4 marks of a learner's marks. So row 1 contains 4 marks for term 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we also have an array called array name that stores the names for each person. So the persons whose marks are in the first row, his name or her name will be in array name in the first position. Okay, so I want to loop through all my values in my two-dimensional array. And now I have a running total. Remember when we want to calculate an average, regardless of whether it's two-dimensional array or anything else, I need to have a running total and I need to know how many marks are added up. So this is my running total. Adding up the marks, remember in the square brackets, we want to start with a row, followed by a comma, and then the column index. So that is my for loop variable ICOL that I'm using there. So this will first, let's say our row is 1. It will add up array mark 1. So for the first person, their marks in column 1, 2, 3, 4. Then only will I row change to 2. And while array mark I row is 2, it will then add up all the columns 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. It will continue to loop through your entire array. After this code, iTotal will have the total overall of all the marks. I now added another variable here. Because I'm calculating the average overall, I will need to multiply how many learners I have, which is in iCountR, by 4. Each learner had 4 marks, so that's how many marks I added up in total. And to calculate the average, I now use this iTotal that I calculated inside of my loops, and I'm dividing that with the number of marks that I added up. And that will give me RAVE, which is the average. So now in my string grid, I want to display in the cells property in column 0, a label called average. So just after the last person's name, so that's why there's a +1, I'll display the label average. And then in here, the cells property in 1. So that means in column 1, that's in the white area of your string grid. Then I will display in iCountR +1 the average. So that is just below the last person's mark. I'm displaying this in my string grid. So can we say, I see Mason is asking, can we say iCountR times iCol? Now, you can't do that, Mason, because what you don't always see with a for loop, and this is a common mistake, is when your for loop is done, I-call is actually changed to 5. So it almost works in the background like a while loop. So it changes to 5 and then it tests I-call against the 4 and it says, oh no, 5 is bigger than 4, and it does not do that. So you could possibly use I-call, but you'll have to deduct 1 and then you have to put it in round brackets. So let's just say I'm typing now. I want to type to all of you guys so everyone can see. I would have to type something like this. I-count is assigned to I-count R times by I-call minus 1. So I think that's correct. But while we're busy chatting and you guys have your chat open, I want you to tell me what errors I made in this line here. The last line has 2 errors. Can you identify them? And let's see who can type in the answer. What's the error in the last line? This is what happens when you code in Word instead of in Delphi and copy and paste. So can you see what the errors are there? Yeah, there's a full stop. There's a random full stop. Yes, that's the one error. There's another error. Yeah, there shouldn't be the full stop. Yeah, and there's 2 brackets. Well done, you guys. Noticed revision. There's 2 brackets here at the end. So that full stop shouldn't be there and that extra bracket shouldn't be there. Okay, so this is how we'll do a calculation overall. Now, the next question here is going to ask us, so that was overall. Now we're getting to, let's say they asked us, find the highest mark for each learner. Now, they're not going to say, find the highest mark in the row. They're going to put it simply that you have to apply your knowledge to a scenario. So this is asking, find the highest mark for each person. Then you have to determine, is it a row question or a column question? So for a row question, so per person, each person's mark is in a row. That means I have to start with a for loop for the row. Sorry, I'm just seeing Jay has asked here, can we say string grid.cells with the inc? Remember, inc is a procedure, so you can't use inc inside of the square brackets. You could use a function there, but you can't use inc because the procedure can't be called as part of another statement. Okay, so let's go back. We're calculating the highest mark per person, so that's a row question. Now, what I'm doing here is, oh, and I'm lying. Sorry, guys, I'm jumping the gun here. I'm not. This is still an overall question. So this is asking the highest mark overall. Any mark. Who is the person with the highest mark, and who is the and what is the mark overall of all the marks entered? Sorry, I already started with the next section. So it doesn't matter in this case because it's an overall question. It doesn't matter with which loop you're starting, but I'm going to start with my for loop for the row. Then I'm looping through my columns 1 to 4, and I'm comparing each mark against the previous highest mark. Now, this is why for this line here is the reason why I gave it a value before my loop. I can't compare it to nothing. So I-high needs a value. And there's a difference in Delphi whether it's a 0 or it's nothing. So it can't handle nothing. Therefore, I made the first person's first mark the highest one. And then from there on, I'm comparing every other mark against whatever is stored in I-high. I also kept the first person's name in S-high. Maybe he was the person with the highest mark, and maybe the first mark was the highest mark. So therefore, I'm storing his name in my one-dimensional array in S-high. So now in my for loop, if it finds a mark that is higher than the previous value stored in I-high, I then overwrite those variables. So I'm putting that person's name in S-high, and I'm putting the mark I'm currently in over I high. So now I will have the new highest mark, and I will have the name of the person matching with that mark. Okay, here's me trying to follow the mouse instead of paying attention. I'm trying to use the mouse to show you where to look. Okay, so this is finding, again, we're still busy with an overall question. I said we have 3 types of questions. So we've done 2 where we have a calculation overall. This is finding the highest to find the lowest. Obviously, you'll just change that operator for the other one. And then, sorry, at the bottom here, after my loop, I can then display I high and S high, and that will hold the value of the highest mark as well as the person's name matching with that mark. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, here we go. Now I can get to my question where we are. Let me just see what the code's doing. We are calculating the average per person. So if the question says this is a question for a row, so it's not going to necessarily say for the row. It's going to, in this scenario, could say calculate the average for each learner. And you know, every learner is in a row. So therefore, we have to start with a for loop for the row. So I'm looping from 1 to I count R. And that will loop through all my learners. But now I've moved initializing the total into inside of my for loop for the row. This is so that I can get the total of each learner, and that if I put this I total above this loop, it will add all the learners' marks together. But I want for each learner to start with a 0 as my I total. And then I'm adding up this person's marks. So here I'm looping through their 4 marks. And I'm adding up every person's mark in here. Then outside of this loop, I now calculate, but I'm still inside of the for loop for the row. So let's say our row was 1. This would go array mark 1, and it will add up this person's marks in column 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that will now be my total for the first person. That's what it's in I total there. They have 4 marks, so I'm dividing by 4, and then I'm storing this in RAVE. So still inside of this for loop, I'm now displaying in the 5th column. Remember, we had 4 columns displaying. In the first 4 columns, we were displaying the 2-dimensional array. In the 5th column now, in the row I'm in, so currently I'm still in row 1, I'm now displaying the average in that 5th column in row 1. Remember now, cells can only take string variables, so therefore I have flow to string f here. And that's why I'm displaying, I'm using flow to string f for my average. So then only does it go to the 2nd row. So now I row is 2, it starts their total with 0, I loop through their 4 marks, and I add their marks, calculate the average, display it in the next row. So now I row will be 2, and so on. So above this loop, I've added an extra column, a column counter here. I have 4 marks. I need a 5th column for the labeling, and now I'm adding a 6th column so that I'm able to display this average. So in the cells property, the 5th column in row 0, that's that top gray row, I'm displaying average. Okay, so that is, so just remember, if it's a per row question, we have to start with a for loop for the row, and you often have initialization to do here inside of your for loop. Okay, let's look at another question. This is finding the highest mark of each person and then storing it in a 5th column of my 2-dimensional array. So if this was needed, the array would have been declared with 5 columns. The example we did yesterday, the array had only 4 columns. So if you guys tell me quickly, if I tried this, but my array mark had only columns 1 to 4, my program will crash, so it will be a runtime error. What is the error message that Delphi will give me if I try to a fifth column, but I've only declared 4 columns in my 2-dimensional array? Let's see who knows. You get these in 1-dimensional arrays as well. So yes, it's an access violation. Well done, guys. Access violation is what the error will say. Okay, so here I'm looping through my rows. I want to find the highest per person. That's a row question. And I'm storing inside here, I'm initializing I high now. So I'm taking the person I'm in. So let's say I am at the moment in row 1. I'm taking their first mark and store it as I high. And from here on, I'm going to compare all this person's marks against I high. I'm starting with my column from 2. It will still work to start at the column for 1, but it will not be as effective because you are comparing the first mark to itself then, but you'll still get the right output. So if I'm looping here through the remainder of their marks, 2, 3, and 4, and I'm comparing each of their marks against I high. And if I find a mark that's higher, I'm overwriting I high with that mark. And before I loop to the next person, I'm putting this value in I row. So I'm still in person 1, and I'm putting it in the 5th column. I'm putting their highest mark. So now I've managed to put every person's highest mark in the 5th column of the 2-dimensional array. Okay, so let's have a look at this one here. This is a column question. So let's say the question asked in our scenario to calculate the average per term. Our terms are stored in columns, so therefore I will start with the for loop for the column. And okay, Khosi, we started here with 2. I'm just going to go back to answer that question. We started here with 2 because I made the first mark of this person, I made I high. So if I started at 1, I'm comparing the same mark with each other because I high contains the first mark. It will still work to start at 1, but you're looping 1 extra time. Okay, so here we go. Here is the per column question. And this here says average per term. So our terms are in the column. So therefore now you're starting with a for loop for your column. So we're looping 4 times. We're initializing each term to 0. So each column is initialized to 0. I then loop through all the rows of this term. So if I am in term 1, I call will be 1. I'm looping through all the rows and I'm adding all term 1's mark to my running total. And here I'm calculating the average using this running total and dividing it by I count R this time, because that's how many marks I have in a term. And then in this case, this is all about this part here is really about what is the question asking you. In this instance, they're asking you to display the average at the bottom of each term. So I stay in column 1 and I want to display it below. That's why I have +1, the last person's mark that was displayed in my string grid. And there I have my floater string F just displaying our average. So very similar, but you guys just have to keep track of what the question is asking and is it a row column question. So you could be asked to display your 2-dimensional array in a string grid, but you could also be asked to display it in a rich edit. Now you guys know the rich edit displays line by line. So therefore, when we're displaying in a rich edit, it is a row question. And since it's a row question, you have to start with a for loop for the row. But remember, you need to possibly have tab stop sets at the top and also maybe the headings. Yes, you can hard code this. I was just using a loop just to show you guys. So I'm using sDisplay as a string and I'm building onto the string. So I'm starting with a label name and a #9 to create the tab. Then I'm looping from 1 to 4 and I'm adding to sDisplay the word term and then my column counter. So this will go name #9, so name tab, then term 1 tab, then term 2 tab, and so on. So I'll loop through all 4, and now this part here is just building the string, and then in my rich edit I display is display, and that's just displaying my headings. Then in this for loop here, remember I said we're displaying per row in a rich edit, so we need to start with a for loop for the row. So I have my for loop I row here, looping from 1 to I count R, and I'm initializing sDisplay on the inside of the loop. So I'm going to display one name at a time. Yes, there are other ways of doing it, but I'm just showing you this way. So this sDisplay is the name of person 1 plus a #9. Then I'm looping through person 1's marks, and I'm adding to them sDisplay plus into string of this mark. Sorry, just something popped up here on my screen. Okay, so I'm adding to sDisplay, and I'm adding each person's mark. Remember to into string. I'm still inside of my for loop for the row. So here I'm displaying sDisplay in my rich edit, the one that I built for person 1. Then I loop to the second person, and I overwrite sDisplay with array name 2. It is also possible, I don't have an example here, to initialize sDisplay here on the outside and build one very long string with sDisplay with the people's names, and then maybe in this line here, you'll add a #10 or a #13 to create an enter, and then outside of this loop, you display the line with the enters using the #10, but you don't have to use that method. You can use this one. Either one, as long as it's correct, that you will be fine. You can use both of them. Okay, so I'm going to jump quickly to my other screen that I seem to have misplaced. Let me just quickly see. Okay. You guys should see this now. Sorry, I'm just changing my view. I'm not sure if you guys are seeing the read view. Let me just confirm with you guys that you are seeing. Oh, goodness. We jumped to the front. Okay. You guys all now see on the screen, I'm going to ask you some questions. You should see a question on your screen now. I hope I clicked the right buttons for you guys to answer me. We have an array. It contains the amount of rainfall per day for the year. So it's a 2-dimensional array, and it was declared with rows 1 to 31 and columns 1 to 12 for my months. It contained an integer, and I want to know which loop would you start with if the question is asking me calculate the total rainfall for the year. So you guys tell me, is it the for loop for the row or the column that I'm going to start with here? Okay, row is correct. Do we have another answer? Because we actually, yes, Mason, anyone is correct. So row and column would be correct because I am calculating the total overall. Where am I going to initialize my total? Would it be on the inside or the outside of my for loops? Outside, yes. So before you start, you've got it, Mason. We're going to do it. I see you guys understand. So overall questions, we're going to initialize before our loops. Well done. Okay, now same array. This time the question is asking us calculate the average rainfall for the year per day. Would this be a for loop for the row or the column? Which one am I going to start with? So there's the array declared. Okay, you guys say it's a row question. So the average rainfall per day. The days are stored in the rows 1 to 31. So therefore, yes, we're starting with a for loop for the rows. Well done, guys. Okay, now here's another one. I want to display this array in the rich edit. Which loop am I starting with? So we want to the row one. Yes, we're displaying per row. You guys are getting the idea of this. Here is a different array. This array contains the number of tickets sold per grade for 5 days. So the array was declared as array tickets 8 to 12. So this is a high school. Every grade is in a row. And then I have the numbers Monday to Friday. That's what my columns are indicating, 1 to 5. Which loop would you start with to display the two-dimensional array in a string grid? Let's see what you guys are saying for this one. I'm not sure if I'm reading Mason's old answer and if I'm reading the new one. We can start with a column J, yes, but Golden Boy, what are you doing there? Okay, what are we starting with? Anyone? Yes, we can start with anyone if we're displaying all of them in the string grid. So don't worry, it happens to us. I had a cat walk over mine and it created a whole bunch of Ds for me on my slides before. So here we have same array. Which loop will you start with to calculate the total per day? So for loop for the row or the column? Okay, the column. Remember, we have the days are stored in the columns 1 to 5. I always struggle to find my mouse here. 1 to 5 is indicating my columns, and that's my days, and therefore I have to start with the for loop for the column. Okay, so which loop will you start with to calculate the average tickets sold per grade? The row. Well done. I think you guys have it. I think this is my last question. So grade 8 to 12, that's my rows. And that, I don't think I said this, but with any array, if you look at the indexes in here, this is actually your clue as to what your for loop must be. So if I want to loop through my grade, my for loop has to be integer, and I loop from 8 to 12. Possibly you could have like in our example where we have a counter. So remember, we don't have to fill my whole array. So this could be a counter 8 to I count. But this here is really your indication of your for loops. This here is saying I have 5 columns. So I'll possibly loop for my columns from 1 to 5. And it goes the same for your one-dimensional arrays. Okay, so you guys learned how to do some calculations in the rich edit, in calculations and finding the highest and the lowest and to display the two-dimensional array in the rich edit. And we have 10 minutes left. And you guys asked me yesterday that we have a quick look at our PAT. So lots of questions about what is the advanced programming section. So what I'm doing is I've taken a screenshot here of your mark sheet. This is really your mark sheet is where you need to go to when you're doing your PAT to make sure you are including everything that is needed. Now, if you have a look at this, you can see this is now to get 4, this right column here is what you need to do. And in there it said excellent and relevant use of arrays could include sensible use of array of objects or parallel arrays or two-dimensional arrays. So remember yesterday I said I can't remember what it said. So if you use two-dimensional arrays appropriately, and you need to do some calculation with it. You can't just have a two-dimensional array and not do anything with it. Then you can score these marks. You can also use parallel arrays. So one-dimensional arrays that run parallel to each other. That would also be an option. And then an array of objects. You guys who, majority of you hopefully have done the OOP, object-oriented programming question. You guys can expect that in question 3 of the final exam this year. And you can have, so we are, for exam purposes, you're only going to have a single object. But it is possible to use an array of objects. So that's, you declare the object as an array in your form where you're going to call it. So that would also be a possibility. That's something that you guys will have to Google. And then more to Google here is the bottom bit, which I think you guys are going to find harder to find, but excellent application of inheritance, polymorphism, or method binding, or effective use of overload methods. So you can go and find out more about those, or you could just use parallel arrays or two-dimensional arrays, which is something that you know already. So that would actually be a good idea. Now, I just wanted to show you guys this here. I really think, I always recommend that my learners start with this. This is your database manipulation. So hopefully you guys have done phase 1 already, and that you're starting with your phase 2 during lockdown, so that you can set up your database and you have to use both the Delphi code. So they're referring here to the Addo tables component, as well as SQL. So this is where you want to start off with. You want to make sure that your PAT, as a minimum, has this in, because this scores quite a few marks. And then add all the fancy stuff that you guys always want to make, because the fancy stuff is not actually worth as many marks as this. You want to start off with a really pretty interface and make sure that you make use of combo boxes and check boxes where it's appropriate. But then you want to go and do your database manipulation. So in my previous lessons from last week, and also the first 2 lessons of this week, I did go over SQL again. So you can find them on YouTube. And then we have sort of the records. So you can use, for sorting, you can either use your Addo table component, which is just tbl, let's say learner.sort. But remember that code for your Addo tables you may not use in your final exams. I'm not sure how many of you guys are aware of the exceptions of Addo tables and what we can't use in there. .sort, .locate, and .filter you may not use in an exam, but you can use it in your PAT. When we want to use a filter for Addo tables in an exam, we have to make use of a while loop with a condition inside of the while loop. So be very careful. You lose quite a few marks for using filter. And remember about locate and sort, that you can't use either. Okay, so sort, yeah, you can use order by in SQL. I prefer to do the majority in SQL. I just find it easier to use. Then search for data. So anything with a where, a condition with a where, or in your SQL, and then insert a new record using either SQL or Addo tables. And insert is easier to use using Addo tables. I know we often make mistakes using the insert in SQL. Addo tables is easier, the .insert. Just remember your .post. Then delete a record from the table. Remember, before you start deleting and inserting, to make a backup of your database, so that you don't mess up. You can always revert then back to your original form. Then edit, so we can use update or the .edit. Then SQL, using string manipulation. So I have explained these in the previous lessons. There is SQL functions that we can use, left, mid, and right, that you have to use. So each of these is one query, but later on we have where we have to have at least 2 here. Then we need one complex SQL query. Now they gave you examples here of what is a complex query. So you want to use having, and remember we want to use having with a group by. So there is an example, add a group by with a having, or a combination of and ors in a single query that you can do as well. And then it says at least 2 SQL queries using different calculations such as min. So these are your aggregate functions, min, max, sum, average, and I would assume count would count as well. And you have to use 2. So you can actually kill 2 birds with one stone here. You can have a complex query. So I'm trying to find my mouse. You have a complex query here using group by and having. So your group by will go with, remember, an aggregate function. So you could do group by, having, and an aggregate function, and then you score both of these. But remember, you need 2 SQL queries doing some calculation. So make sure that you have 2 of the functions calculating min, max, sum, average, or count. And then you need 1 query involving 2 tables with SQL. Remember, we have to indicate the link, and then you have in your from, you need to list both your tables. We did that as well in the previous lessons. And then here we have to use the arrow tables here to loop through both tables. That was actually asked last year in the final exam as well. So make sure you know how to do it and make sure you include it in your PAT. And then the last one is a dynamic SQL query. And that just means that you get input from the user and that you use that input in your where. So you could have in an example of having learners stored in a database, let's say the person entered the grade and you are storing that grade in a variable, and you're using that variable as part of your value in your where of your SQL statement. Okay, so is there any other place? I'm just reading some questions here where we can make a database because I don't have access. I don't know. I know some of my learners, I don't know if what is it called? Malala? No. Sorry, I'm completely confused now. One of my learners can maybe tell them where you can register. And maybe send them the link of how to get access, because I know majority of you guys don't have that yet, which is at this stage a big concern to most of us. Okay, we are going to finish off. Mahala, sorry, I'm thinking about Malala because I saw a picture of her yesterday. So if you Google Mahala, thank you, ma'am. I see we have a teacher joining us as well. It also doesn't come with access. So yes, that is a problem. I hope that someone from the department is listening so we can somehow get our learners access. Okay, so there's the link that you can download papers from. You guys can go into these papers. Supplementary 2019 is question 4. Question 3 of all these papers has 2D arrays in, and then there's even OOP questions that contain 2D arrays. So when you go to this website, click on curriculum and then click on National Senior Certificate, and you'll find all these past papers there. It's good for you guys to practice. So if I look at, I know you can't see, but the final of 2017. So let me just, this final question here, question 3. You guys can currently do question 3.1 and 3.2. So before tomorrow's lesson, I'd really like you guys to try this. Maybe you have some questions or errors, and then we can cover that tomorrow. If you got stuck with the final of question 2017, question 3.1 and 3.2, you should cope with at this moment because we've covered everything. Okay, so we are in our next lessons, what we'll do is 2-dimensional arrays. We're almost ending. So anything extra that you guys want to me to do, you can post on the chat. So I know what you guys want help with for our next lessons, but this is my plan, is to continue with 2-dimensional arrays and how we delete and insert into them, and also how to sort them. So Thank you very much to STEM Lockdown Digital School. Keep an eye this weekend on YouTube. Go and follow Africa Teen Gigs on all these platforms. They're on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter. And then you will also find the channel Africa Teen Gigs under YouTube, where all these lessons will be posted. And then it's a long weekend. So I think our next lesson is on Tuesday. I actually can't remember. I think Monday is a holiday as well, but it will be at the same time. And if there are new links, we'll let you know. I'm not quite sure if there is new links. So thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you on Tuesday. Please do your pack this weekend. And then please also practice that final of 2017 question 3.1 and 3.2 before I see you again. Bye.